Now let's talk about more advanced server settings and configurations. By default, when you install EasyMorph Server, it comes in a default configuration, and we've made this default configuration easy to start with, but at the same time, it doesn't use some of the advanced settings, also including some of the security settings, and that's why the default server configuration is less secure than what it can be. But if you made it initially very tight in terms of security, then it would be hard to start with, because, well, everything will be logged, and you have to understand well how to configure server in order to make it work as necessary. So it was a trade-off. So we decided to start with an easier to use, easier to start configuration, but it means that after you get more familiar with the server, you would probably want to tighten some security settings, and we will talk about this today as well. So let's start with user roles. So by default, EasyMorph Server is configured to allow anonymous access, which means that anybody can access the server and can use anything on the server with basically all the permissions. So that's the default model, but you may want to have more granular control on who can do what. And for that purpose, we have a mechanism that is called permissions and roles. So let's look at that. You can configure user roles and permissions in space settings, because every space has its own roles and every role has its own set of permissions. So user roles are not per server, they are per space. For that, to configure user roles, you go to space settings, you pick the space you want to configure, and then you go to users and permissions. And here we can configure user roles. When you click, each space by default has one role, the default role. It cannot be deleted. So here you have a list of permissions that can be configured for each role. These permissions, there are indication of what the user can do, but it's not at this point. We don't have a more granular security system that would be control what the user can access. It means that, for instance, if the user can read connectors from the repository, the user can read all connectors. If the user can see and retrieve catalog assets, it means that the user can retrieve all catalog assets. Later this year, we're going to introduce a more granular permission system that will work in combination with roles. But for now, separating what user can access is done on the space level. So if a user doesn't have to see something, then don't give him or her access to this particular space. So these are the permissions, and also those permissions are in many cases restrictions for the application capability. For instance, when we talk about file permissions, and we say upload and delete files, it does not mean that the user has these file permissions on the Windows level, on the system level. So those are still managed by the worker account. It barely means that the user will not be able to upload and delete files through EasyMorph Server's user interface. So that's this. But if the user, for instance, creates a Python script that deletes some files, well, that settings will not prevent that. So you have transitions. So these permissions are basically the capabilities of EasyMorph Server exposed to the user, but these are not system level permissions, because that works in a different way. Well, having said that, we have two types of roles. So when you create a new role, you need to pick you will pick from one of two types: regular role and extension roles. So what are they? So when regular roles allow the user to access anything in the or what is permitted by the role in the space and perform the actions permitted in the space. Extension roles, they are displayed with the plus sign in front. The extension roles by themselves, they don't allow users to access the space. Instead, they extend permissions that are applied. They extend permissions of another role. For instance, you may have a default role that allows the users to access and perform certain things in the space. And let's say the default role only allows, let's say, only seeing catalog assets, but not creating or editing them. Then you can create an extension role, and you can assign the default role to everyone. But then you can create an analyst role, and in the analyst role you can add permissions for editing Explorer assets. So now when you assign roles to someone, for instance, here in the space I have two roles assigned: the default role and the analyst role. And because of that, roles will be combined, and while everybody has the default role, I and only I will have the additional permission to edit catalog assets. So everybody else will be able to see and use catalog assets, but only I will be able to edit them, because I have this additional extension role assigned to me. And as you can see, you can assign multiple roles to users, and in this case, the permissions will combine. So we talked about regular roles, extension roles, role combination. Now, an important capability is being able to assign roles to user groups. And if we go to users, to the list of users, you can also define user groups, and these user groups they're defined on the server level, not on the space level. So currently, you can only work with user groups if you have external identity providers configured and used, and those external and that capability is only available in the Enterprise Edition. User groups allow a convenient user management configuration, where instead of listing users specifically in each space, well, who can explicitly access this or that space, instead you can assign user groups. For instance, in this default space, we can use a group of people, and we can assign external user group. So we select a group. Okay, I don't remember that group name exactly. So let's try to do that. User groups and testers. Okay. HID testers. If I add it, it found entry testers. Okay, so now I can assign a role to them. So now, well, groups are indicated with this icon. So a role is assigned to a whole group of users in the space. So it makes it convenient to manage user groups in a centralized way. So for instance, if you have Active Directory or Entra ID, you can manage all the group, including people who can access this or that space right in Active Directory or right in Entra ID or whatever external identity provider will be added later and supports grouping. So in the space access control list, you can only use one group and maybe give additional permissions to specific people using extension roles. So this is a very convenient and very good user management system that allows managing hundreds of users in a centralized way with a little administrative overhead. So it's quite convenient. Let's keep going. Now let's talk about workers. So what are workers? By default, EasyMorph Server runs as a single process, which is also called the default worker. So all the spaces, all the connectors, like all the users, whatever workflow you run and create, it's executed by this one main process, which runs under the server Windows account. This is the default configuration. In the Enterprise Edition, and recently we've added this capability to enable this capability in the Team Edition as well. So the Team Edition and the Enterprise Editions now allow creating additional workers. So a worker, it's a separate process. It's a separate process that can run under a different Windows account. And you can allocate spaces to run not in the main process, but in the worker processes. And one worker process can run multiple spaces if you wish, or just one space. And this is an important feature that has multiple benefits. Well, first of all, since workers can run under different Windows accounts, it allows very strong separation of access, which is controlled by the operational system, by Windows, where no matter what you do in space 2, it cannot access files, connectors, or anything. Even if you run like a Python script or Windows shell command or anything else, it cannot access space 4 that is executed by a different worker, because this whole worker runs under a different Windows account. It has a public folder that is accessed only by this worker and cannot be accessed by another worker, and so on. So this is a very low level separation of access that is guaranteed by Windows. So it's a pretty strong guarantee. Thanks, Bronislav. So better access isolation. Also, workers allow better monitoring. So since they are separate processes, you can see a summary of all workers in your server UI, where you can see each worker and see the process ID, the Windows process ID here. You can see how much memory it consumes and what's the current CPU utilization. So if you have a heavy task running and consuming many resources, if you move it to a separate worker, you will be able to see how much memory that worker consumes, what is the CPU utilization. So you can, it gives you better visibility in what on your server consumes more resources. Also, the better isolation means that you can control what happens with your workflow. Sometimes, especially when your workflow runs something external, like external script, or it can be PowerShell script or Python script. What to do if, let's say, if that script hangs, or if you ran an external application from the command line using the run program action, and it's stuck. So how you try to stop the task, but since the action expects the external application, or the external application under the hood, it expects user input from a hidden console or something else, you cannot really delete it. So you have to either you have to restart the whole server, or if you have this process running in a worker, you can recycle just that worker. So recycling a worker means that you detach it, and you let it finish separately in a separate this basically this chain, this link is removed, and the worker becomes simply an orphan Windows process. Even if it doesn't terminate itself, you have this process ID number, so you can open Windows Process Manager, and you can find this process by ID, and you can kill it. You can kill it by ID. So well, I have to add the column. So you can kill it right here in the Windows Task Manager. So that's another benefit of using workers. And one more benefit. So let's responding. 1 second. And one more benefit is workload management, and we'll talk about this in a moment. So workload management, what's that? In every worker settings, and by the way, I forgot to mention, so once you configure workers, you can choose which worker will be used by a space. So in the space settings, you have this worker selection, so you can change and select another worker, and conveniently EasyMorph will do a pre-flight checks, where it will check whether the selected worker has all the necessary permissions and Windows settings to work with the space. Now, talking about workload management, in the worker settings, you can configure workload management settings. So what is that, and why we created this? Well, first of all, as you know, EasyMorph Server is memory intense, because the engine, EasyMorph's engine, it's an in-memory engine, so it transforms all data in memory, which has many benefits: speed, security, and other things. But also, it means that memory is shared across all spaces, across all tasks, and if you run out of memory on your machine, that can make the server unstable or even crash. It will slow down the server. It will trigger Windows swapping. So it's not good. So you don't want to run out of memory on your EasyMorph server. So controlling memory consumption is important for server stability. But at the same time, you may have, since we encourage self-service, it means that users, server users can run tasks, retrieve computed assets, and maybe do something else that may cause a heavy workload on the server. So how to ensure that users don't do anything that may crash your EasyMorph server, because all the spaces run in one process if you don't use workers. So for that, well, first of all, you can isolate and move user spaces to different workers. And second, you can isolate or control the workload, and you do it with two limits. There is a hard memory consumption limit and the soft memory consumption limit. Technically, they are configured in worker settings in the workload management tab. So let's start with the soft limit. So if you enable the soft limit, the server will keep running all the existing computations tasks, computed assets, but it will reject new computations. So let's say if I set the memory limit for this work at 6 gigabytes, it means if this worker reaches 6 gigabyte of memory consumption, it will reject all new computations. So if users will try to run a new task on this worker, or more specifically in the space that runs on this worker, the task will immediately fail. So it won't start. Not convenient, but it will preserve the space running. So soft limit. And finally, the hard limit, you can, if it's configure it and make it 10 gigabytes, if the worker increases its memory consumption to 10 gigabyte, it will start canceling absolutely all computations. So it will try to save memory by all possible means, which also means by to cancel all the running computations. So it will force all computations to fail. This is very extreme measure, but it will help saving the server operational, because again, all the workers, all the spaces, they share the same computer memory, and you don't want that memory to exhaust. So that's that's a convenient feature. And by the way, when users run a space, so when you have a space running on a worker, this indicator in tasks will it's a bit slow. This indicator in tasks will display the memory available. Well, this one, available memory. It will display the memory available on this worker, not for the whole server, but on this particular worker. So when you have those soft and hard limits configured, it will display those limits here, so the users can see and understand what are the boundaries of their workloads they can execute. Now let's switch to the last topic of today. It's tightening server security. So how to do that? Well, first of all, the first recommendation is, of course, configuring the SSL certificate. You can configure it in the server monitor by stopping the server and checking this button using HTTPS, and then it will show additional settings for importing certificate or picking an existing SSL certificate. So you do this in the server monitor. Second, ensure security of repositories. Use only server hosted repositories in desktop. Don't use local repositories. Enforce read and write passwords for connector repositories. So when you create or edit a repository, you can, or for file repositories, you can change passwords here. And for the server repositories, you configure it on the server side in the space settings. So if you go to server administration, spaces, default, and repository, here you can set read password and write password. So you can configure those as well. What else? In terms of authentication and access, disable anonymous access. It's enabled by default for easier configuration and simplify getting started. But after once you become more familiar with server administration, disable it. So people must authenticate and they must have roles assigned. Don't use the legacy authentication. If you use EasyMorph, have been using EasyMorph Server for a long time, previously, we didn't have this role-based model. So we had only what we call now the legacy authentication scheme, where a password is shared per space. This authentication scheme is still supported to simplify migration from older versions. But once you have a newer version that supports user roles, don't use the legacy authentication anymore. It's not as secure. Then, if you're lucky to have the enterprise edition, use external identity providers, because they allow groups, and also external identity providers can provide additional means such as the two-factor authentication that are not available, at least for now, with the internal user identities. So it's more secure to use external IDPs. Finally, one of the things that people overlook with the new user role model is that server admins no longer can access everything by default. Now, server admins are just when they access spaces, they are regular users. So make sure. So if you give server, so you need to provide server admins with relevant roles and access permissions, and make sure that you do it only when it's necessary, and you remove it when those permissions are no longer necessary. Yes, admins can give them permissions themselves. That's true, but at least there is a record about this in the server journal. So that is recorded. So it's not entirely secret. Then workflows. Don't use embedded connectors in workflows, and you can disable copying connectors in server settings. So if you go to user roles and permissions, in the user role, there is additional permission: copy connectors to clipboard. Don't enable that unless it's necessary. Also, this server EasyMorph workflows are signed with a digital signature. Sorry, I'm running a little bit over time. Don't enable this in spaces. Well, with this unsigned projects, I don't remember if they're enabled or disabled by default. Don't allow them. So make them forbid unsigned projects or projects with broken digital signature, because it means that someone else outside EasyMorph changed the workflow, and probably you don't want that. Also, disable actions that allow arbitrary code execution. Running Python scripts, running external applications. If that's not necessary, well, then disabled in space settings. If queries use parameters, then enforce parameter validation. This is a bit tricky one because as of today, if you use queries with parameters, and I will demonstrate it in an example. So 1 second. So this is less about server security. It's my computer is getting so slow. Okay, when I share my screen. So for instance, in this example, we use a query, and that query uses a parameter. So if you view SQL, custom SQL under the hood, we will see that, well, this is where parameter is used. So as you can see, parameters are inserted as is. Basically, they are there is text insertion right into the SQL query, and that's potentially a risk of SQL injection. So to reduce the risk of SQL injection, configure validation rules in EasyMorph workflows and parameters. You can configure validation rules, and here, for instance, you can, if you expect this to be a number, then make a validation rule that it's a number. If you expect it to be a text, make sure that this text has a limit, let's say 10 characters or 5 characters, so that you cannot insert a long SQL statement in that parameter and cause SQL injection. A few more. So I'm finishing, almost there. Don't use the default worker, because the default worker is the worker that runs in the main process, which means the default worker has access to server settings, server files, because they are all executed in the same Windows process, and we cannot physically restrict that. If someone runs a Python script in the default worker, then he or she can potentially access server configuration files and make changes. While the server critical server configuration files are protected from tampering, still this is not something you would enable. So don't use the default worker. You create other workers and run your spaces on other workers than the default one. Also use an external database for the journal, because the journal may contain sensitive information, and currently it's just an SQLite table. The internal database is just an SQLite file which can be copied. It doesn't have built-in security means, so a more secure way for the journal is using the external database. This feature is only available in the Enterprise Edition. And finally, disable self-signed certificates and remove unused space features. You can configure space features in server settings on the in the space settings. Here you can enable and disable features. So if a particular space doesn't require, let's say, file manager, then disable it. Don't use it.
All right, it looks like Dimitri is done with his portion. Thank you so much for watching the video, and we'll see you on the next one.